Chapter 12. Emma. Before. February 14th, 4.5 months ago. Emma clutched her backpack and stared out the car window as her dad pulled out of the driveway. She was very aware of Abby sitting next to her and didn't want to accidentally bump her or make eye contact. Abby had barely spoken to her since the room incident, and now the car was full of the worst kind of quiet, heavy and uncomfortable. Emma knew she shouldn't have helped Ollie redecorate Abby's room, but was it really that big a deal? If that was enough to drive away Dustin, then he scared pretty easy. Why would Abby even be interested in a boy like that? She'd made the mistake of saying something like that a few days ago. It had been enough to make Abby break her silent treatment, and she'd screamed at Emma. Things like, ruined my life, and never forgive you. Harsh, strong words. Clearly, destroying Emma's stuffed animals hadn't been enough for her. So now Emma did her best to avoid Abby, which was pretty easy most of the time. Abby stayed in her room at home and didn't talk to her at school. But this morning, Abby had asked their dad if he would mind giving them a ride to school, which meant Emma was trapped in the car with her. It felt a little like being trapped in a box with a python, waiting every second for it to strike. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. It was a terrible image. The first faint notes of All I Ask of You, the love song from the Phantom of the Opera, floated through the car. Emma cracked an eye open. Abby had her phone out, obviously linked to the car stereo. She looked over at Emma. Peace offering? She said. Really? Emma opened both eyes and sat up straighter. Abby shrugged. Why not? Dad, do you mind if we listen to this? As long as Emma does her usual accompaniment, I don't mind. That's the plan, Abby said. Emma smiled, her heart floating like a petal on water. She hadn't realized how heavy she'd felt, weighed down by all of Abby's anger. And even though Abby only gave her a small, tight-lipped smile back, Emma knew it was a good start. She relaxed against her seat and sang along with the duet, doing falsetto for Christine's part and dropping her voice low for Raoul's return, trying to be as dramatic as possible, the way she usually did when she sang along in the car, because it made Abby laugh. Ab- Abby didn't laugh this time. She was too busy fiddling with her phone. Emma tried not to feel disappointed, but after the song ended, she stopped singing. A duet from Hamlet rang out next, but Emma just listened to it quietly and watched the trees and other cars blur past the window until the hulking bricks of Elkview Middle School loomed in front of her. Happy Valentine's Day, their dad said, parking in front. Don't eat too much candy. There will be cupcakes waiting for you at home. Freshly baked or store-bought? Emma asked. Don't insult me. Emma laughed. Thanks, Dad. She leaned forward to kiss him on the cheek. Thanks for the ride. Abby slid out of her side. Wait up. Emma opened her door and scooted out, but Abby didn't slow down or look back. Emma hurried after her anyhow. She stopped, recognizing Tanya Marshall, leaning forward against the wall near the front doors of the school. Emma slowed down, watching as Abby and Tanya were looking at something on her phone. Tanya threw her head back and laughed, the sound as loud and obnoxious as she was. Emma's fists clenched. She really didn't like Tanya. It was dislike bordering dangerous on hatred. Not that Emma believed in hating anyone. Mostly, she just tried pretending Tanya didn't exist. It was hard, though, because Tanya was the 8th grade class secretary, which means she got to do the morning announcements. So Emma had to start every school day listening to that voice, that raspy, grating voice. Your sister is such a dork. Emma pressed her lips together and hung back, letting Abby and Tanya get further ahead before following them into school. Construction paper hearts of every color covered the lockers and the walls. At the end of the hall, a cluster of girls and boys sat behind a long table, all of them wearing bright pink and red ribbons in their hair or looped through their hats, and hearts drawn in lipstick on their cheeks. 3 dozen roses, red, pink, and white, sat in vases on the table, next to a large sign that read, $5 for a rose and a song. Emma imagined herself sitting with them, her hair in pigtails, lipstick drying on her cheek, anticipation filling her stomach as she prepared to spend the day singing to people. Maybe if she had tried out for chorus this year. "Emma McBee?" someone called. Emma blinked, startled away from her thoughts. Tanya was smirking at her. She turned and whispered something to the cupids behind the table, and they all looked right at Emma, all of those eyes zeroing in on her face. Emma froze, her feet pinned by the weight of those stairs. Her lungs felt too tight, like she was drowning, like the hall was filling with water, and not just the noise and air and too many people. Emma cast about for something to save her, some friendly face, and spotted Abby standing next to Tanya. Abby met her gaze, just for a second, her own eyes wide. But Emma remembered the way that her sister had looked the first time Tanya came over, when she'd made fun of Emma's posters, how Abby had followed Tanya from the room and hadn't said a word in Emma's defense, only looked back at her guiltily. Abby was wearing the same guilty expression now. She turned away from Emma, and the spell broke. Emma managed to peel her feet from the floor, turn, and plunge away down the hall and into the safety of her home room. "You okay?" Grace asked as Emma dropped into the seat next to her. Emma managed a smile, even though her heart was thumping and her mouth felt too dry. Why had they all been staring at her? What was Tanya planning? Dread pulled in a thick, viscous layer, coating her stomach. It felt like pop quiz day when she hadn't done the reading, but all she said was, "I'm fine." Then she looked over her shoulder. Grace was wearing all black today, black shirt, black skirt, black lipstick. It looked impressive against the pale blonde of her hair and eyebrows. "You look very dramatic." "I'm protesting," Grace explained. "This is a ridiculous, consumer-driven holiday, and we shouldn't all be subjected to cheap cards, badly sung love songs, and artificially flavored candy." Emma really enjoyed cards, and love songs, and candy hearts, but she nodded anyhow. Grace was a hard person to be friends with, but it was better than no friends at all. People filed into the room, most of them laughing and chatting, an excited buzz running through the air. Emma longed to be a part of it. If she were still at her old school, she would be giving out cards now. She loved making them, cutting elaborate paper hearts and covering them with stickers and glitter, then giving each of them one quick spritz of her mom's favorite perfume. This year, she hadn't bothered to make cards. Ollie didn't care about things like that, and Abby probably would have torn hers up, and Emma really didn't have anyone else to give them to. Back in California, she'd never been popular, but she'd always had at least a few friends. She hadn't wanted to leave them, but her mom promised her she'd make new ones here. "Think of this move as a completely fresh start," her mom had said when Emma told her that she was afraid no one in her new school would like her. "A chance for you to discover who you really want to be, with no prior expectations." For a second, Emma had imagined what it would be like to be a bolder version of herself. It had been an exhilarating thought. All the heroines in her favorite musicals and Broadway plays were larger than life, and maybe she could be too. Those first 2 weeks after they moved, Emma had tried. She had joined chorus right away, and then she'd gathered up all her courage and signed up for auditions for the school musical. The lead female role, even, embracing her mom's encouragement, putting a sticker that read "Go Big or Go Home" on the folder with the sheet music, practicing every evening, every morning, every free moment until Ollie threatened to take up drumming if she didn't cut it out. The morning of the audition, Emma had felt ready. She knew the words by heart, had the melody down, and was as prepared as anyone could possibly be with only 2 weeks of practice time. She had started making tentative friendships with the other theater kids in her grade, and had even sat with a couple of them that day at lunch, all of them comparing notes, thrumming with excitement. And then the school day ended, and the auditions began, and the real Emma was exposed. She closed her eyes, not wanting to remember what it had felt like when she'd stood on that stage. The heat from the spotlight baking her skin, the feeling of all those eyes on her, the weight of expectation, and then the horrible realization that she couldn't remember the words, the notes, anything. She'd stared out at the darkened theater and been totally blank. Only one thought made it through the wall of nothing filling her brain. I don't belong here. As soon as she thought that, her mind had flooded with anguish. Who was she trying to fool? She wasn't brave. And the lead role? What had she been thinking? No other sixth grader had tried out for that, and with good reason. She knew everyone must be wondering who she thought she was, judging from her overreaching, laughing at her behind her back. Her legs had started moving before she'd even told them to, racing her off the stage and out of the auditorium. The next day at school, she had avoided all the other theater kids, ignoring them when they called to her and asking Abby if she could sit with her at lunch instead. She'd kept that up for the rest of the week, and the following week too, until finally no one called to her. No one invited her to sit with them. Only Abby. The bell rang and Emma opened her eyes, showing all of those memories away. She didn't have Abby as a friend anymore. She didn't have anyone. The loudspeaker crackled to life. "Good morning, Elkview," Tanya practically screamed through the microphone. Emma wasn't the only one who winced. Who is ready for a day of love? This is exactly what I'm protesting, Grace muttered, rolling her eyes. As you all know, singing cupids will be coming around to your classes throughout the day, delivering roses and music. It's not too late to buy one for your sweetie, or, yourself. Nicole Kaufman, we all know that's what you did, by the way. Tanya, a woman's faint voice snapped. Kidding, Tanya said. Anywho, to get us into the right spirit, I have a song for you all. Here is someone's enthusiastic rendition of a duet with herself. And then, in front of the whole school, piped into every homeroom, Emma's voice sang, All I Ask of You. The world turned itself inside out while Emma stood there, stunned. It was a dream. It was a nightmare. Underneath the ringing in her ears, she could hear herself singing Christine's part, her voice ridiculously shaky and high-pitched as she emphasized the vibrato. It had been a joke, but as kids around her laughed, she never found anything less funny in her life. I will never sing again, she vowed, for once not caring how strong a statement that was. She squeezed her eyes shut, tried blocking out the giggles and the distorted sounds of her voice, and waited for it to be over. At least no one knew it was her singing, except for Abby. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest, her heart aching. Abby's peace offering had been a lie. A big, fat, cruel lie. Abruptly, the music cut off and Tanya came back. That's all the time we have, folks. But before you go, let's give a round of applause for our singer. No, Emma thought, her eyes popping open. Our very own Emma McBee. It was as if the room had become a tunnel, and Emma couldn't turn her head, couldn't look at anyone. Her face burned with humiliation. It wasn't a tunnel at all. It was a well, dark and deep, and she was trapped at the bottom. The bell rang, and she grabbed her stuff and sprinted out the door, trying to escape before anyone saw her crying. She got to her first class of the day early and slid into a seat in the back, then busied herself with her books and pens so she wouldn't have to look at anyone. But even without looking, she could feel them staring at her. A few people snickered. Whispers slipped around corners of the room, her name sliding with them. Emma took a deep, shaky breath and opened her eyes wide to stop the tears from spilling out. She just had to get through this class. It was Valentine's Day, after all. Soon everyone would be distracted by their love letters and their roses, and they'd forget about the embarrassing serenade. The bell rang and Miss Whipple began her lecture on the Pythagorean theorem. Emma didn't hear any of it, even though she sat there with her eyes glued to the whiteboard, her pen poised over her notebook like she was soaking in every word. Minutes crawled past and Emma's shoulders slowly relaxed. People stopped sneaking glances at her. She could pretend the announcement this morning had never happened. She imagined sealing that memory away in a little tiny box in the back of her head and instantly felt better. Halfway through class, the door opened. Miss Whipple stopped her lecture mid-word as four cupids waltzed inside, the girl in front carrying a bright red rose like a baton. Emma sat up straighter and eyed the other kids around her, trying to guess who the intended victim was. Probably Bethany, she decided. She was one of the only seventh graders with a real boyfriend. But the quartet threaded their way through Bethany and straight over to Emma. Emma blinked, surprised. For a second her heart thumped painfully. Hopefully. Someone had sent her a rose and a song. Then the girl in front opened her mouth and started singing. Emma went numb as the words of "All I Ask of You" washed over her in an a cappella wave. She stayed numb as the singers ended with "From Your Secret Admirer" before bursting into small, secretive giggles. They pressed the rose into her hand and then left. Silence filled the room. Emma stared down at her rose, each petal folding in and around the other, the color as red as blood. The lines around them blurred, shifting, and no matter how wide she held her eyes, she couldn't stop the tears that spilled over and splashed onto her desk. She knew she needed to be cool, to play off this joke, but she couldn't. "Are you okay, Emma?" Miss Whipple asked. Emma nodded. Can I go to the bathroom?" "Of course. Do you need—" But Emma didn't hear the rest. Sobbing, she ran out of the room and down the hall, then threw herself into the nearest bathroom. Abby had done this. Emma cried harder, and each sob pulling at something deep inside her. It felt like she was tearing open from the inside. Abby had set her up. She had taken something Emma loved and destroyed it. Slowly, Emma's sobs quieted, her breath coming in short hiccuppy gasps. She looked down at the rose still clutched in her hand and dropped it. Then she stomped on it, grinding the petals into the slate gray tile of the bathroom floor. She stayed in the bathroom until the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Taking another deep breath, she splashed water on her face, dried herself off, and slipped out into the hallway. As she made her way back towards her math classroom, she spotted something that stopped her cold. Abby, walking down the hallway, her red hair bouncing along in a high ponytail. In one hand she held a long-stemmed rose, and she was smiling. Smiling! Emma stared at that rose in her sister's hand and imagined Abby blushing and laughing as the Cupids sang some stupid little love song from Dustin. They have thrilled at the end. And Emma realized she wasn't sad after all. She was furious. Abby noticed her and jerked to a stop. "Emma." Emma balled her hands into fists. "Don't talk to me." Abby flinched. "Hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't know Tanya would—" "I said, don't talk to me," Emma spat. A few people in the hallway turned to stare, but Emma no longer cared. "Never talk to me again." She shoved past her. "Emma, wait!" Emma felt Abby's hands on her arm. She whipped around, yanking herself free. "I hate you," she told Abby. Abby's face crumpled, and she fell back as if Emma had shoved her. Good, Emma thought viciously. Saying those words made her feel powerful, but it also made her feel sick. She'd never told anyone she'd hated them before, and as she stalked away, she kept thinking of the rose she'd destroyed, its petals torn and broken.